Let's see if I can adjust quality a little bit. There we go. Yeah, I know. I forget to mute it when I'm in the loading stage. So, welcome everyone to another casual stroll through Middle Earth in Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer on the project. I've been working on it for a very long time now. So over the last year or so, or even longer now, probably close to 2 years, right? I've been doing these tours through Lord of the Rings Online, as voted on by you, the players, and we kind of go through, do a deep dive, behind the scenes conversation about the region, about world building, about the lore and work that we do to bring these regions to life. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, this is your first time, welcome aboard. Just want to remind you that this is a world design focused stream. I'm here to purely talk about the landscape, level design, world design, and the work that goes into that, um, as well as provide a little bit of trivia and behind the scenes stuff associated with that. So I won't be answering questions regarding things like balance, PvMP, lag, and other performance issues. Unfortunately, there's not much I can talk about before the Shadow as well, our recently announced mini expansion. Um, there are some little things I can discuss here and there, but overall, we have bigger plans for those conversations when we're ready to talk about them, which will hopefully be soon. So, anyways, to give everyone a little bit of background here, so we are now in southern Mirkwood. A little bit ago, we did a poll for what regions we should go to next, and instead of kind of polling everyone week by every month that we go to do this, I decided to just kind of like rank everything. So we went through Moria first, we went through Lothlorien second, Southern Mirkwood happened to be the third highest vote. So I believe there was a tie between in Southern Mirkwood and I forget which other region tied for it. But it made sense going contiguously from Moria to Lothlorien to Mirkwood. So, welcome aboard, everyone. So, Southern Mirkwood was our second expansion. We launched Mines of Moria as our first expansion to the game, and the Siege of Mirkwood was our second expansion. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this expansion was kind of have a Archet-esque world change introductory experience to set the stage for the story that we were telling, and to kind of on ramp players into the experience. It was also a way for us to handle what we like to call a land rush scenario, um, where we launch a product and everyone is like logging in all at once to like really hammer home on it, and doing this kind of we call it the Mirkwood Landing introductory experience really helped us kind of even out the number of players that were in the space without burdening our servers too much for it, and help kind of spread things out a little bit. People would kind of come in and take their time through the space, and they wouldn't feel like they were having too much competition for the content in the space, so they could kind of enjoy it as they wanted to. So yeah, right now we are in the Mirkwood Landing version of Murkeves. Like I said before, this region will change based off of where you are in the storyline. So, for example, we are very limited in where we can go. It's a very small portion of the Murkeves is available. I shouldn't say very small, but it is a limited portion of Murkeves is available for this. And as you progress through the storyline, you eventually unlock the full I0 version, the Instance Zero, the public version that you can then go through. So we'll run around through here a little bit and get to the kind of point where things change. One of the things that we tried to do too here was really use our NPCs and our patrols to make it feel like the rangers that were landing here and the elves that were landing here were working to take back at least this foothold into Mirkwood. I think there are some aspects of what we've done here that have kind of informed a little bit of what we did in War of Three Peaks, in that landscape region. Um, I think with every region we do, particularly anytime we do a world change thing like this, we learn a little bit more. But they are a lot of work, and we tend to try to leverage our phasing tech a little bit more, to provide that world change than to do a world change instance like this is. It was actually kind of funny. I don't know if that's funny, but it was interesting that I was trying to fix a bug, with the Black Gate, where the bug was reported that there were like floating assets in the sky, and I went there, and no matter what, I could not figure out where it was, and what it was a instance of kind of quest state phasing, where the structures of the Black Gate um, change what they look like based off of your quest state, which wasn't something I had seen before. It was a pretty heavily scripted experience, pretty heavily like scripted um, entity, that I was unfamiliar with. So I wasn't able to fix that bug, but it was interesting to see like, oh, we can change the physical appearance of something, just through a quest state without doing phasing, and it makes me wonder if like what the level of effort was to do something like that, and if that's something that we could consider doing in the future. Um, so we'll go through quick on some of these questions before I pop us over into the public version of uh, Murky's. So Druid's Fire says it would be cool if the tech could ever manage to let players actually swim across the river, plus, but alas, phasing. So it's something that I really would like to resolve at some point, but I think the fact that, um, this is a instanced space initially makes that a little tricky. Um, what I'd like to do is to better find a better way to at least indicate where that line of death is. I have a task in my queue to take care of that, um, but it's just a matter of finding the time, to do that, because I'm a very busy person. Um, So Little Redhead says, it seems timely to see this area as we are now on Treebeard. That was very much a coincidence, not something that I had planned for. But Soft Snake GR asks, is there any chance to develop the intro quest so we can connect the area with Ravanian? So again, similar to Druid's Fire's question, I think it would take a lot more work beyond just me doing work in order to make that happen. Um, it's something that I bring up every few months with Maid of Lions, and there's always this like, oh, but that would be so much work from both of our sides to actually make it happen. I think this is somewhat a victim of us never really expecting we would get as far as we did, and I think each update for a while we were just like, oh well, we'll never get further than this. Oh, we'll never get further than this, and then we do, and I think now we try to develop a little bit with a little bit more awareness, in regards to that. All right, so I'm going to move us over into the public version real quick so that we can continue on. All right, so I believe we are in the right version now. We'll see if I get up to the gate. There's a stable master here, so that this should be the right one. Instance layering is always tricky. The way that this whole system is set up is like when you teleport in, the teleport is kind of what tells the game, like that's how the game sort of knows what version of the space to put you in. Very similar to how Archit is. Like, oh, okay, you've completed this quest. Then that means that you can come into this space in this version of it, kind of thing. And that's very much the same with Mirkwood, where Mirkwood is kind of silently looking for the fact that you completed the intro to Mirkwood in order to kind of drop you in the right layer. Uh, So Ionar says, I'd be happy to be allowed to swim down the river itself, putting the barriers on the shore, but not out in the middle of the river. Yeah, I think it's a combination of like pulling back the smite volumes a little bit, and maybe doing some additional deco to indicate like basically boats and corpses floating in the water and whatnot, and also doing some things like maybe bringing in some reeds and whatnot in there as well. Um, to better sell the look and feel of the space. So B414 asks, was the Mirkwood landing area created first, or was it extracted from a completed southern Mirkwood? They're actually the same physical space. They are they are not separate individual spaces at all. They're the same physical space. It's just different instances that occur there cause different things um, to happen. Depending on your quest state and whether or not you're in the instance. So it's not like we copied off the space. It is the same physical space. Oh, this camp. I remember playing through this on my burglar when it first came out and dying so much in here. Though it looks a lot less fearsome than it was when we originally introduced it. So we'll go down through here, and I do definitely appreciate people's want and interest to be able to walk into this space contiguously, and it is something that I am also interested in and would like to see. But it is going to be a not inconsequential amount of work to do that. So Paisy160 says, I've only started playing recently, so I've not seen this area. I'm now very excited to get here because I love the idea of a progressed world state and eventually fixing that bridge. Uh, yeah, so in the Murkeeves, those bridges that we came across, there were a couple of them. In the public version, the bridges have been repaired and you're able to cross them in order to participate in the landscape and monster camps that are on the other side. And welcome. We're glad you joined us. So Ionar says gated areas like Mirkwood and Moria make it are hard to make free roaming. Unfortunately, it's completely geographically accurate to make Mordor a restricted map and Moria. It's the Mirkwood zone that is incongruous as a restricted area. Again, I think it's very much a victim of like us not thinking we would go much further, and kind of the idea being that you know, not to say that we didn't want to keep going, but just kind of like a little bit of our own short sightedness. Like, oh, we will never do Northern Mirkwood. We'll never get there because our road is taking us to Mordor. So we don't really have to think too much about how that's going to connect. And then, oops, we did. Um, so Starkhack DK says, I guess Tristlebridge also has some progressive states, i.e. repairing the houses. So yeah, as part of what we did with the Wildwood content release, the Wildwood introduced a quest line where through your actions you repair some of the buildings there. The tricky thing about phasing anything is it can only change what the visuals look like. So it can turn on and off visuals basically, but it can't actually change the physics of the space. So the footprint has to stay the same. Like there's a part of me that like looks back at Archit, and I'm really not very keen on ever going back to revising Archit again because of just how crazy it is, how much is going on there. But looking back at Archit, there's definitely a lot of it that could benefit through either phasing or through the same kind of quest state appearance changes that were done with the Black Gate. And that would drastically simplify what the space looks like from a development perspective. Right now, whenever we get a bug, whenever any of us gets a bug to go into Archit, we all kind of cringe a little bit because we know how challenging Archit is to work in. So we'll go through a couple more questions, or comments, anyways. When North Mirkwood came out, I have to say I thought it was impressive, better than the older Southern Mirkwood. How much overlap of resources is there between the two different Mirkwood areas we currently have? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by resources. If you mean, um, the people that worked on it, the assets that are used in the space. I was not a part of the Northern Mirkwood development process. I was off at other companies during that time. So I can't really speak to what was going through the minds of the people that were making it different, but I will definitely say that I think um, Southern Mirkwood was really much more intended to be like a war zone. And you've seen how, we've all seen pictures and footage of what war zones look like, World War II, World War One, just how forests and fields are just raised. And I think with Southern Mirkwood, while we still wanted to make sure it was a forest, we wanted to really have it have more of a ravaged feel to it. Whereas uh, Northern Mirkwood, Aaron Lasgalen, was very much more inspired by The Hobbit. Um, it's a lot of the content in there is inspired by The Hobbit. Um, so I think the intent of that was to sell more of the Hobbit style Mirkwood than a at war Mirkwood. Let's see. Soft Snake GR says the green frills glow in the dark, and you have to tone them down a bit. So there are some frills certainly that I think you know I think a lot of assets have benefited from the introduction of our new per pixel lighting attenuation system. But unfortunately, some need work, and we're kind of like over time doing what we can to improve those assets here and there so that they work better with this new lighting system. Um, so that means that some frills and some assets, like certainly, you may have come across like rocks and boulders that look like super shiny, and that's because they worked fine in the old system, but they're missing aspects to their art, particularly spec maps that the new system is looking for. Um, it's always been interesting doing some like asset archaeology on some of our older structures, older items, where like some of them don't even have normal maps. Like we have some assets that just don't have normal maps, and that's kind of like unheard of in this day and age as far as video game art goes. Little Redhead asks, so for designing at this point, I presume you assume you'll be developing everywhere at some point, just in case. I think there's some of that, some of us like expecting that we'll be trying to fill in and cover as much as the map as possible, and being comfortable with trying to how do I want to phrase this? Being comfortable with making drastic changes to the boundaries of existing landscape in order to accommodate that, which you all will see very soon in Before the Shadow. Um, the work that we've done in Swanfleet and Cardelon specifically kind of speaks directly to that. Like we are really opening up a large portion of area door by adjusting the existing impassables as we have been for it. Let's see. Druid's Fire says it would be nice to be able to rebuild Archit, get those Thornley and uh, Adso to do more on their properties. Yeah, I think Archit is unless we completely if we unless we decide to completely like scrap and redo what our beginner experience is in those spaces, um, I doubt that we will ever kind of go back to have like a rebuild Archit storyline, just because it is such a uh, complex space, and then adding in on top a rebuild phase just further adds to the complexity around it. And I think we're more of the mind like whatever we can do to make uh, things a little bit easier for us to work in, the better it is for us. And the better it is for people who have, you know, never worked on the project before and are just kind of joining the project, as we've had a few of them. You know, having our build methods be a little bit simpler is definitely much better and easier for those people who are just joining the team. I would not envy anyone who just joined the team and then was given a ton of like Thorin's Hall and Arid Lewin, or Thorin's Hall and Archit bugs to fix. I really want to. So Little Redhead says, I really want to build Adso's camp. I'm hoping it'll be a further adventures down the road and a build a pony further adventures too. Yeah, I think one of the exciting things about the further adventures content lines is it does it gives our designers an opportunity to kind of like take a break from the heavy forward moving narrative stuff that we are known for and give them a little bit of breather and to tell stories that may not necessarily fit into um, what our current story direction is. I mean, I think this past year, for better or worse, is kind of a good example of that, is of us like taking a little bit of a breather, letting us play around in spaces that we haven't really either been to in a while or that we felt that there were additional stories to tell. So the Scuttle Dells was a great challenge on level, navigationally and mentally, uh, from Stars and Rangers. Was that a fun area to design on the design end? I'll be somewhat honest and say that the challenge with building any forest is, I think, doing the high level like sculpt and placement of scene files is always a lot of fun because you create a lot of like interesting looks and feels. The challenge with these kinds of spaces comes when, okay, you've done that and now you have to put in all of the like monster camps, resource nodes, mixed spawns, quest objects, like all of that stuff. And it's actually really kind of hard to do that kind of placement in a forest, because you have these trees, you have this canopy overhead. Even if it's like a fairly bare canopy like this one right now, you have this canopy overhead that makes it really hard for you to see what you're placing, where you're placing things. Um, so yeah, that's the answer. It's fun to do the initial build, a little bit of a headache to do the follow up build on, to do the like content implementation on. Like the headache that is working in the old forest because of the tree canopy is very real. um, all right, so Don't know if this was asked, but are there plans to change the boats on the Anduin into dockmasters and also make it accessible from other locations like Vegbar, Hithslet, Lissed, Seld, Brownlands, Floodwind, etc.? So I really like the Dockmasters. I think they were fun to implement on the Brandywine, and um, I may be adding some more of those in on the Brandywine soon. Um, Probably not as part of 34, but potentially part of 30 of update 34, potentially after the fact. Um, so I think they're a lot of fun, and they give another like navigational option. I always, for some reason, in my head think this is Ost Galahad. Um, they give another navigational option, and I think having that for the brand new or for the Anduin is also a great option. It's not something that's on my immediate radar, but it is something that eventually we would like to do. What was the hardest? So Runloft asks, what was the hardest area to work on in Southern Mirkwood? What gave the most headaches and why? Um, so I talked a little bit about that with like canopies getting in the way, making things a little bit challenging. I think the only other thing that kind of adds additional challenge to that is when you have both a tree canopy and spider webs. Um, those two assets, those two sets of and types of assets really can kind of get in the way of everything. It makes it really hard to see, what you're working on, where you're working, how you're placing things. Particularly difficult if those assets also have physics to them. Um, I think from a player perspective, places like the Scuttle Dell can be a little frustrating just because of how channeled they can be. Um, we had the same sort of issue in the Trollshaws, particularly in Northern Trollshaws. And if I had the opportunity to like redevelop it again from scratch, I would add a little bit more traversability to it. Still keep it channeled, but not make the channels also. Oop, and I'm in the drink. Not make the channels also intense. All right. So go down through here again. A lot of people seem to be in support of finishing Thornley's worksite before we get around to doing before we get around to rebuilding Archit. I think Thornley's worksite is a much better candidate for the kind of like progressive, um, quest-driven rebuild compared to Archit, just because it's a much more simple space. Um, Loamfind says, or asks, which fortress is larger in Lotro, Dol Guldur or Barad-dûr? I would have to say probably Barad-dûr. Um, I don't think Dol Guldur is. I think Dol Guldur is still at a scale that cleaves very closely to some of our older um, mentality as far as it comes to landmarks. I think we try to keep things like that of a certain size so that they're not so big and so kind of overblown that it's but you do get an impressive silhouette. But I do think Barad-dûr is bigger physically. B414 says it's nice to know that the old forest is as challenging to work in as it is to navigate in. Yeah, and I think part of the challenge of working in the old forest was the tree walls. If it was more of a kind of like wide open space, if it was more of a space where it was just like a forest painted down, where we weren't trying to physically make it a maze, I think it would be a little bit easier to work with. Um, because then there are time like we have tools that allow us to toggle off to hide scene assets and whatnot, so that we can be like, oh, this scene file place tree. We can just like click a button, and the trees, the rocks, the frills all disappear, and it's much easier to work with. Um, However, in the old forest, like it's all hand placed tree walls everywhere, and those are much harder to hide. And you still need to know where the footprint of those assets are, so it's not like you can make them go completely away. All right, I'm getting off my horse. I'm running a little bit faster now because we're at the halfway point, and I don't think I've made it halfway through the region yet. I remember having fun in this space too. Let's not run quite so fast. Barrow stuff is always like just fun to see because I think everyone that I've worked with kind of takes a slightly different approach to how they work with Barrow assets. And it's always interesting to me how like the different looks and feels and styles that different people bring to Barrows. B414 says, I love the hidden deed for climbing the towers in Asp Galad. Spoilers, not hidden anymore. Jeez. Um, why was the landscape part of Dol Guldur so empty compared to the rest? I think, and I don't know the specific reasons, but if I had to guess, I would guess that it has to do with just concern over complexity of the space because it's a very large point of interest. Um, Also, a lot of the um, intense content that happens in those spaces generally happens in instances. So I'm not sure if there was concern about there being too much going on in those spaces, and that's why like spawns and whatnot in Dol Guldur proper might be a little bit lighter. There's a tendency for one RT to often be unfindable in southern Mirkwood. Could there be a hidden spawn point that is not accessible to players, or a landscape trap where uh, roving threats can sometimes disappear? I'm unfamiliar with the roving threat system and how it was implemented in Mirkwood, so I won't be able to answer that question specifically. I would say if there were any roving threats that seem to be less common or less reliably findable, I would suggest filing a bug for it so that we can have someone investigate it. I know I lean heavily on the file your bugs, but seriously, like filing bugs does really help us. Getting things into the queue really does help us. Um, it's one thing to talk about it on the message boards, but um, and I know sometimes filing a bug can be a headache. It can be a pain because of how you need to go about doing it, but it really is a valuable way for us to know when and where something needs to be fixed, and it's easier for us to track it. So Softsnake GR asks, is the southern does southern Mirkwood cover all the southern part of Mirkwood, or is there more in the southeast side? So let's go up here. So here's our world map. Um, and you can see Dol Guldur here kind of perched in the western third of the southern portion of Mirkwood. So there really is a considerable amount of potential landscape. I think we've got all of this here, which could potentially be additional region. We've got the Narrows, which we hinted at a little bit when we introduced the Vales of Anduin. You've got Emyn Newfune, the Mountains of Mirkwood, which could have things going on in them. And then you have the areas north, kind of the more wintry forests north of Aaron Lasgulin. So there's certainly no shortage of Mirkwood to plumb if we decided to do so. Um, I think for us, it's a matter of like what makes sense from us from a story perspective. Like if we were to say, work our way towards Rune, maybe going through Mirkwood to get to it might make sense. Um, but until we're at that point to make that decision, um, we can only speculate. Um, so Runloft asks, was there any real forests or other places in particular that was used as reference for the look and feel of Mirkwood? So I know at least portions of the Black Forest, at least portions of southern Mirkwood, the Black Forest in Germany were things that we looked at. I think we also kind of looked at like I had mentioned before, World War One and World War Two, like landscapes and how particularly forests were ravaged in the way that they were in those conflicts. You know, the and then some of it was like us taking inspiration from our existing forests in the game and thinking, okay, so we built this forest this way. What would this forest look like if it was corrupted in some manner? So I think we've approached it from a bunch of different directions. We hadn't yet built Fangorn. We had some experience with Old Forest, but um, we didn't really want Mirkwood to feel like the Old Forest. We wanted it to have a variety of distinct feels to it, which is why we have, I think, 4 or 5 different styles of forest throughout all of uh, all of Mirkwood. So Guitar Chim says, "Hi Scenario, big fan. I've seen every episode on YouTube. Was Dulguldur made before or after the rest of Mirkwood? I believe it was introduced as part of Mirkwood. Um, I don't remember if the instances all happened at the same time, but building it all occurred at the same time. So it wasn't like we built Mirkwood and then boop, giant castle showed up. Like it was there. It was all part of the epic story. I'm not sure if I don't remember if the instances came online at the same time. I would guess they did, um, but I don't entirely recall because it was a long time ago, very long time ago. So who here has ever accidentally run off this edge before with their horse? Because that seems like a fall. I know sometimes if you like run off an edge and you kind of the hug the wall as you're kind of falling, you can sort of work your way around a untimely demise. But it's been a while since I've been through here. I love this road texture. This is one of my favorite road textures. I've actually like recently started in the work that I'm doing now, which is not related to um, Before the Shadow. I started using some of this road texture, and it just I like we need to use it more. It feels good. Um, so one of the things too that there was a question earlier about how kind of like sparse running through here in Dulguldur feels, and I think some of that is like a hindsight experience. Like we put a lot more effort now into making the spaces we build feel like full and lush and detailed. And when this was made, however many years ago, um, we often didn't do that in large part out of performance concerns. We didn't want the video perf of the space to suffer. So often we have much less deco going on. You know, it actually, like, it hurts a little bit, even going, like, when we were doing the Moria tour, it just hurt a little bit going through and um, seeing like how undecorated some of the spaces felt, because at the time, like, 15 years ago, like, that was like good and acceptable for what people expect out of a game, particularly out of an MMO. Maybe not so much a single player console style experience, but in MMO, like, it wasn't like super high fidelity, high detail was not really something that was a priority for a lot of players. And I think as technology has advanced, new games have been introduced. Like, I think it's become more important that we try to have more detail in what we build. Oh, good old Dread. So Yao says, with Aaron Lasgalin, we had another version of Dol Guldur. When you're doing things like that, different versions of Minas Tirith 2, uh, are you just doing a copy and paste of the area and then tweaking newly from scratch, or are you building mostly from scratch? So we usually start with um, a copy of the existing version, and then we make changes as we need to. So, this Dol Guldur, we may have copied the portions of it, the portions that are playable, and then kind of like cleaned out the rest of it because we don't really need it, for the purposes of being in that space. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit to like rocket jump my way up top and see if I can get to places that I'm not supposed to go. Whee! I'm going to try to get all the way up to the top here. So yeah, that's usually what we do. We have a lot of places where we've copied things. Like the Hornburg is, Helm's Deep is another big example of that, where we had multiple copies of it for the different versions that you're going in and experiencing. So, um, so yeah, that's usually where we start. Like, for example, in Before the Shadow, we have a version of a space that is set in a different time period that, we built the present day version, then, or no, how did we do it? No, I think what we did with that one was one of our designers copied the landscape that I had built the like different time zone version of the space, copied it back, and then ruined it. So it really depends on what the needs are for a space. As Newell Bazaar was originally a copy of Dimrell Dale, and then the new landscapes that were added as part of As Newell Bazaar got copied. Portions of those got copied back into As Newell, or got copied back into the Dimrell Dale. So like we move back and forth pretty easily, and thankfully we have tools that kind of make that copying back and forth pretty simple. Um, Not without their own headaches, but it is something that we're able to do pretty handedly. All right, so we'll go through and I'll get a drink and then I'll answer a couple more questions. All right. Yeah, I think so. Bell Navarra says at the time these were impressive. They just don't hold up as much in newer zones. Enedwaith on for me, and I think Enedwaith. So you mentioned Enedwaith, and I think Enedwaith is really kind of a good example of I think the point where we started needing to be a bit more complex in our world design efforts. All right, I'm gonna just try to rocket jump up as high as I can. Go all the way up here. Made it. Yeah, so these guys are just 2D planes. Don't mind them. So not related to Green Tea says asks which expansion would you consider the most ambitious? Um, I mean, I think not having worked on all of them, but just from like seeing each of them as an individual project, I think Mordor was probably the most ambitious one, and honestly, it's the one that we very often end up comparing ourselves to most regularly when we're starting to work on, a new update, a new mini expansion, new expansion. Like Mordor is often kind of the standard that comes up. The Great Big Fall. So yeah, Mordor is probably our most ambitious one. Um, Scartac DK says not related to Mirkwood, but do you as a world designer feel connected to Slarty Bartfast designing fjord coastlines in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? I have to admit, like that, anytime someone asks me what I do, like a friend or they are just trying to like wrap their head around what am I running into here? Doesn't want me to go that way. All right, this is probably an instancing issue because I'm hacking my way around stuff. All right, well we'll start looking at dungeons since. So yeah, like I will often take that scene and share it with people that are just trying to like learn a little bit more about what it is that I do because I feel like there is a certain like kinship in how um, how the character conveys what they did and honestly like kind of the fondness that they have for it. Um, I know there are mixed opinions about the quality of the movie, but I think there's some great scenes and there's a great cast in that movie. And honestly, the talking about the fjord scene is one that I think was done fairly well. Um, so we're taking a look at some of these interiors too. Um, this is one of our quest hubs. The Haunted Inn was meant to be kind of like our, you know, our take two of the Forsaken Inn, kind of. So Guitar Chim says, as a world builder, do you also build raids like for Baird Guldur? Were you the main guy making that? I don't think I built any of the instances for Mirkwood. I don't think I did. Um, I built a lot of these dungeon spaces. Usually, how we break it up is there's usually is a world designer who is assigned to build dungeon spaces. Um, and that person will work closely with the content designer and kind of build the space to meet the needs of the designer. Though sometimes we shake that up a little bit as well, where like you may have one person, you may have a high concept for a space, but a designer doesn't have a specific particular need for what it needs to look like, and then that's an opportunity for a world designer to kind of just like go a little crazy and you know put their own take or spin on what a space looks like. And some content designers and incident designers are more able to um, build in that way than others. And it all depends on the individual's style and how they prefer to build their spaces. So Druid's Fire says, I remember being curious about the place, which she's talking about, Tharbad from a previous constant on Fonstad's map. The Fonstad Atlas is a incredible resource. It's something that we reference considerably when we're working on new regions, because it is a good collection of a variety of different map sources. All right, let's. Some people might be familiar with this space. So again, this is another like instance of like at the time that we built it, I think we thought it looked pretty cool. Um, but then, in modern terms, like this is not a particularly high fidelity space, and while how it was constructed may not have anything particularly wrong with it, it certainly is something where if we were to kind of go through and redo it, it would look drastically different. Because I feel like building this in this way was kind of like a, oh well, this is good enough sort of thing um, at that time, and now our standards are just much higher. Let's see. So Belnavar says Mordor was my least favorite, but I can't deny its ambition and scale. I'm talking about the most ambitious expansion pack. I absolutely love Minas Morgul and Gundabad, albeit not the lack of high level content since the latter. So yeah, I think whenever we go to produce a expansion pack, we're always trying to find ways to make it feel ambitious, make it feel big, make it feel like a grand offering. And that can the shape that takes um, can vary. No, all right, I can't go there. Um, so like for example, Minas Morgul was physically a much smaller space, but I think where we tried to make that pay off was in the like culmination of other major plots and whatnot that were being built up through all of, I mean, effectively through all of the game. Like you get to see the payoff of characters that you've been interacting with, some of them even from level like 1 in Minas Morgul. And I think that is like that's really a like exciting and interesting thing, and I think that's where the compelling aspect of that expansion pack really hits home. That is an impressive silhouette. Uh, So let's see, going through some of the other questions while we're in here. Druid's Fire says, I wish there was a stable master outside Barad-dûr somewhere. Dor Marth is such a long ride back and forth. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance to be had there between convenience and then also like suspension of disbelief. Um, having a stable master right out front of an enemy stronghold may be convenient, but does it feel okay to do that? And that's a question that we ask ourselves a lot whenever we are um, building out spaces like this. So Green Tea says, I haven't been to Mordor yet. I just finished The Riders of Rohan and Helm's Deep. Riders of Rohan seemed very ambitious to me, and I noticed a lot of improvements in details. Story was great, and it also introduced new mechanics. Um, I think Riders of Rohan was ambitious at the time that we made it because it was meant to be kind of our biggest, most open piece of landscape ever. Um, both Rohan regions were kind of meant to be that, and I think that's where a lot of the ambition lies with those updates. I mean, everything that we do, we try to have some ambition associated with it. We don't want to, we don't want our expansion packs to feel like we aren't kind of reaching for the stars. All right. Runloff. Solon's Alv says, sorry in advance if I bother anybody with this question, but would we get a toggle for shield scope on the back while out of combat someday? Unfortunately, one, well, thank you for joining us and for chiming in with your thoughts. Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question for you. That's more related to kind of game systems and art. I'd recommend going to our message boards and positing the question there. You may be able to get an answer. Um, Belnavar. So Runloff says, you all do a great job on building this world and keeping us entertained. A lot of the older stuff still holds up, in my opinion, anyways. And I think some of what I've been talking about is, by and large, a product of me having hindsight and having kind of been in the guts of it. Um, you know, I think everyone has a different experience of something. For us as designers, our experience of it is a very lived-in experience where we are constantly like in the trenches, in the depths of working on this stuff. So our kind of our experience of these things is very and I fell off because it was too dark. Is very much kind of couched in that. So it is almost 2 o'clock. I haven't gotten through all the dungeons yet, but I think a lot of you have known or seen them. I actually don't have any. I don't actually have any like behind the scenes interiors for Mirkwood. Pretty much everything that we built, we used in Mirkwood. So we don't really have anything that is like kind of sneaky, hidden, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'll run down through these questions, and I think it's probably time for us to kind of wrap it up for the day. So we'll just go down through. What do we have for questions? Well, Belnavar says the landscape of Rohan was and still is absolutely gorgeous. Let's see. Do you have any dungeon spaces with the amazing skybox of the moon? Maybe this one. There we go. This will be our send off for the instance. I think this was the one that was being talked about, Belnavar. All right. So, has anyone else noticed the eerie similarity of Mordor stonework and Numenorian Gondor stonework? The interior of Orthanc is too much like the interior of Dol Guldur. I certainly think that there is some. There's two parts to that. One part is there's certainly a cross pollination of style between between the cultures that built Dol Guldur and Numenor and Gondor. They kind of had their hands in everything. Um, the so yeah, there's that, and then there's also the fact that the art team that built those things is pretty much the same art team, and the methods that they use to build things are very in order to produce a volume of assets, it's a lot easier to try to think of the same like shapes and forms. And honestly, like a lot of those kinds of shapes and forms are prominent in kind of real world architecture. There's a lot of similarities. So there's a couple of reasons behind it. Not saying they're the greatest reasons, but those are kind of the reasons for it. Anyways, so at the end of it all, it's a little bit over time now, so I want to just thank everyone for coming, hanging out, chatting, asking your questions, and putting forth your comments. I know everyone is excited to learn a little bit more about Before the Shadow. I'm excited to show off Swanfleet and Cardelon. We don't have a date yet for a casual stroll on that, but hopefully very soon we'll let you know when you can expect it. In the meantime, we have our list of regions to go through, so probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll be doing another one of these to hit the next highest vote on Rovanian. So, anyways, thank you everyone. Hope you have a great week. I think Bullroar is open now, so if you're interested in checking out any of the changes that are coming as part of the 33.2 update, I believe there's PBMP changes. There's some class changes that are going on in there, as well as miscellaneous bug fixes. So feel free to check out the Bullroar message boards, and then get your Bullroar client updated and check those out as well. Anyways, thank you everyone. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you in our next stroll.